end dressing room, but he'd had worse. The audience was primarily female. It always was for these events. Thomas assumed it was the same for teenage heartthrobs when they attended events years later, but he had never been a heartthrob in any sense of the word, and these women only wanted him now because he was a reminder of their youth. He stopped scanning the audience as he spied a lone woman in her 40s in the fourth row. Her blonde hair pulled back. Slim and still as stunningly attractive as she was as a teenager, Thomas grinned on seeing her and straightened his jacket. Ah, Jane, you couldn't stay away from me. Now Thomas Williams had an audience that he gave a damn about. As the audience mumbled and muttered excitedly to each other, a small, stocky woman in her late 30s walked to the lectern, tapping the microphone on it to check that it was working, silencing the audience's conversations as they turned to face her with expectant gazes. When he'd arrived an hour earlier, she told Thomas her name, and he seemed to remember that she was the manager of one floor. But there were so many managers and store owners over the years that in the end they all merged into one. He never remembered the names. Well, only the pretty ones. "Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight," she began, her face beaming with pride. "When I was a girl, I loved the Magpie books. I'd even dream of one day solving cases with Tommy Williams, Luke Ashton, Tessa Martinez, Jane Taylor, Daniel McCarthy, and Dexter the dog. Anyone else do that?" There was a smattering of hands and a chuckle of approving laughter. Validated, the manager continued. "One reason the book sold so well, apart from the excellent writing of Reginald Troughton, was that the 5 characters... And the dog?" a voice called out. Thomas, listening, cringed. He had hated that bloody spaniel. "And the dog, yes," the manager replied. "One reason the book sold so well was because, unlike so many other teenage detective stories, these were true, written by Troughton, based on notes and interviews given to him by the Magpies themselves." Thomas moved into position for his entrance, and the audience, seeing this, fidgeted with excitement as, unaware of this, the manager continued. "And tonight we're very lucky to have with us one of the original Magpies, a man who has written new introductions for the upcoming reprints, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the group's first adventure," she gushed. "He's here today to sign them for you, but before we put him to work, let's hear it for Tommy from the Magpies, Thomas Williams." As the audience applauded and cheered, Thomas walked to the lectern, waving to the crowd and nodding to the manager as she backed away to give him space. Now at the lectern, he gave a second brief wave to his adoring fans and then spoke. A prepared speech that he'd spoken at events around the world for over 20 years. One so well rehearsed that he could alter it on the fly. "When my cousin Luke and I started the Magpies, it was to prove that our milkman wasn't a killer," he explained. "We couldn't even conceive the global phenomenon that it would become, but Reginald Troughton did. He believed the stories he would write about us would become famous, would make us famous." He went to motion towards the back of the room, but paused, thrown for a moment. There was a gap at the back of the crowd that shouldn't be there, and a cryptic message he'd had earlier that day suddenly made sense. Unfortunately, Reginald can't be with us today, as he's suffering from a head cold in Scotland." He continued on, recovering. "But he sends his regards to all of you." He looked at Jane, who, realizing what he was about to do, started shaking her head. "But that's not to say I'm the only celebrity here today." Thomas smiled, pointing to her. "I'd like to introduce to you another member of the Magpies, my good friend, Jane Taylor." As the audience, surprised at such a person in their midst, looked to Jane and applauded, Thomas took a deep breath, grateful to her for the distraction. Because Reginald Troughton wasn't in Scotland and didn't have a cold.